So welcome. Thank you all for coming. It is so exciting for me to see all of you here tonight, to hear from our wonderful panelists. As some of you may know, I'm Heather Fertone. I'm the Associate Dean for Professional Engagement at Penn Law. And we are really excited to have you here tonight to listen to our panelists and to talk to you a little bit about what we're doing at Penn Law in terms of our engagement with government and policymakers in Washington, D.C. in particular. As many of you know, Penn Law has a long-standing commitment to service, and we have really been focusing on how we bring our teaching, our research, the career preparation of our fabulous students, some of whom I see here today, so thank you guys for coming, to bear for the benefit of government and policymakers in Washington. And I wanted to just highlight a few of the new things that we're doing at the law school before I turn it over to introduce our panelists. As some of you may know, we have a very robust legislative clinic, which Carlos has been very helpful with in the last couple of years, and that's where we have students come to Washington 2 days a week and work on Senate committees or in government offices on legislative issues. We have a new public policy workshop where we'll have students working on the issue of private healthcare exchanges and how they're implemented in light of public exchanges, and working both with federal policymakers as well as policymakers in state capitals. We have a new government visitors program for the next 2 years. Troy Paredes, who is a former SEC commissioner, will be serving as the Distinguished Policy Fellow at the law school, and he'll bring to bear teaching, he'll be working with faculty, he'll be working with students, research, and really engaging in our community. We have a new government and public policy postgraduate fellowship program, really aimed towards helping students begin their careers in government. We have a very robust loan repayment program, which I'm hopeful that some of our panelists have or will take advantage of. And in the coming years, we will be considerably expanding our externship programs, both in DC as well as sort of throughout the nation. And those are just some highlights to sort of give you a sense of our overall commitment to really expanding our presence in this way. And we recognize that connecting to this world really starts with our students and our alumni, which is what makes tonight so exciting, that we have these folks here to share our experience with all of you. I will quickly introduce our panelists. So immediately to my right, we have Carlos Uriarte. He is an 05 grad, and he is currently senior counsel in the Office of the Secretary at the Department of the Interior. To his right is Johanna Thomas. She's an 07 grad, and she's an attorney advisor in the Media Bureau's Industry Analysis Division at the Federal Communications Commission. Did I do that right? You did. Excellent. And next to her is Heath Tarbert. He's a 01 grad, and he's a partner at Allen & Overy, and he leads the U.S. Bank Regulatory Group. Next to Heath is Laura Conn. Laura is an 08 grad, and she is in the Office of the Legal Advisor at the State Department, where she works on international claims and investment disputes. And to her right is Scott Kieff. He's a 94 grad. He's a commissioner of the United States International Trade Commission. Prior to serving as commissioner, Mr. Kieff served as a professor at George Washington University Law School and a senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. And with that, I will turn it over to Scott, who is going to do our moderating for this evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Heather, for pulling this together. And it's another one of the many fun things that Penn Law has been doing for all of us and will be doing for all of us in the years to come. I have to say I am especially glad to hear you celebrating the recent acquisition by Penn Law of former SEC Commissioner Troy Paredes as a member of the Penn community. Troy and I are dear friends and have co-authored a whole lot of anti-insomnia medication that can put any of you to sleep faster than really any good law school textbook should. But Troy's also just a spectacularly good lawyer who can think through ideas and problems. And so he'll be able to help students as they wrestle with business issues and regulatory issues in the government, and just is another example of Penn's commitment to this area. So let me just then begin by walking down the line, if you will. Can you join me and walk with me as we hear just a short story from each of our panelists about their lives and how they got to their posts in government from Penn Law. So Laura, if we could start with you.
Yeah, so I guess starting with Penn Law, I went to Penn, participated in a lot of kind of clinics and student organizations while I was there, and clerked for a year afterwards in Philly for a district court judge, which was a great experience. After that, I came to DC to a law firm called O'Melveny & Myers. I didn't have a great idea of exactly what practice group or exactly what I would be doing there, but I ended up doing both just kind of some general commercial litigation as well as working a lot on international matters, whether it was Foreign Corrupt Practices Act or kind of investigating cross-border fraud, and worked actually a lot kind of against, I guess, across the table with the government in that role, usually as we were representing companies or individuals that were being investigated by the SEC or DOJ. I was there for about 2.5 years. It was probably around the 2-year mark that I started, maybe a little after that, started thinking that I might want to move to government or more broadly to like a nonprofit public service organization. And started looking around. I'd always had an interest in international work, and the Office of the Legal Advisor at the State Department is a unique place where you do a lot of public international law that, of course, you can't do in the private sector because you're actually representing the government publicly. And I had some friends at State actually on the policy side who advised me that it was a good time to apply. And I did, and went over to State about almost 2 years ago now.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Laura. And Heath, you're now at a law firm, but you've been interacting with the government quite a bit.
Yeah, and I've had a very circuitous route. So I was actually in the government in about 5 different positions, from sort of leaving Penn till now. At Penn, I thought at some point I'd like to serve in the government, but I didn't know in which capacity. I know I wanted to come to Washington. Everyone else, sort of 75% of the class headed to Wall Street, but I came down here. In law school, I'd written my comment on an obscure topic, a then obscure topic, now still sort of obscure, sort of bank capital requirements, regulating banks to make them safe and sound. But this was back in 1999 or 2000, so it was sort of this, off topic. Went to a law firm, Sullivan and Cromwell, worked here for 3 years, and realized if I wanted to have a DC career, I probably needed to sort of make a move into government. And my path, similar to yours, was to apply for a clerkship. I clerked for Douglas Ginsburg of the DC Circuit. Penn was very supportive in that regard. They put in my application, lightning struck, ended up clerking for Justice Thomas at the Supreme Court. And then what happened was there was a spot left in the White House counsel's office. The Bush administration had about 8 months left in it. There were lots of slots. People were trying to leave. It was probably going to be the last Republican president for some time. I had a friend there. This goes to our networking story later, who said, actually, there's some spots available. Why don't you come here for a bit? It seemed like a great honor and a position that I probably wouldn't have been qualified for a few years back. I got into the White House counsel's office in August of 2008. Because I'd had this financial background, I had written my comment at Penn, they said, the person that had the financial markets portfolio is gone. We're going to give that to you, but don't worry, there's not much going on. Of course, the financial crisis hits, and so I became the White House lawyer on the financial crisis. Long story short, got out of the White House, couldn't get a job in the private sector because of the financial crisis, ended up going to the Senate Banking Committee, worked on the Dodd-Frank Act, and then found my way back to private practice. So that's sort of the more circuitous route.
And of course, that means that you have several thousand overlaps with Commissioner Paredes, who swore into his position as an SEC commissioner in August of '08, going to work at that quiet, sleepy part of the government that, you know, really no one was paying too much attention to until the system crashed. I'm sure you guys ran into each other as well on the Hill. Laura, you've talked about your time in international work. Heath, you've talked about your time here on these financial issues. Johanna, as you think about what got you to the Federal Communications Commission doing this high-tech current media work, tell us the story.
So I didn't go into law school knowing that I wanted to do internet, media, and telecommunications, but my mom was, she's a television producer and was getting her master's in mass communications when I was in elementary and middle school, and so it had always been something in the back of my head, but I took a First Amendment, my third year fall, I took First Amendment with Pursley, and loved it, and loved the First Amendment, thought it was great. And when I had accepted my offer to come back to Arnold and Porter, so when Arnold and Porter sent me, you know, all the paperwork and wanted to know what practice group I wanted to go into, I thought about, you know, did I want to do litigation or corporate or, you know, regulatory? And because I love the First Amendment so much, really wanted to do a practice group where I could potentially do First Amendment issues. So the telecom, internet, and media practice group stood out for me. And luckily, they hadn't really taken any new associates. I didn't know it at the time. I knew some people who were like third years in the group and talked to them, and they, you know, spoke highly of it. So I put it down, and the group was a little surprised that I had put it down, but they were open to me coming in and joining them, and so I did. So I went into the Arnold and Porter's telecom, media, and internet practice group, and was there for 3.5 years. AMP's big client is AT&T. You might have heard of them, I don't know. And so we do a lot of their merger work. And so every wireless transaction that AT&T was involved in between 2007 up until T-Mobile, I worked on. And then there were other clients as well, doing smaller matters. I even actually worked on the AT&T DirecTV merger, which was super hush-hush at the time, no longer. But kind of being in the telecom field and going to different there's a Federal Communications Bar Association, so going to different FCBA events, it became clear, kind of like the other panelists just said, that if I really wanted to focus in this area, that I needed to go to the FCC and get some experience there. So in January of 2010, I started applying to the FCC, to various positions. And luckily, the FCC, like most of the government agencies, had been on a freeze. But in 2010, they were hiring again. And so after a lot of networking, I got a job in January of 2011 in the Media Bureau's Industry Analysis Division, which looks at market competition with media companies. So while we're not doing net neutrality, which I think everyone here probably knows a little bit about, we're doing the AT&T, well, we're doing AT&T DirecTV. I won't be working on that, but also the Comcast Time Warner merger. I don't know if you might have heard of that one. So it's been a really cool experience to kind of be, you know, right in the agency as all these matters are hitting, and, you know, to really kind of have the ability to work on, you know, things that will shape the, you know, industry for the next 20 to, you know, 10 to 15 years or per se.
So it's probably very easy for many of you to think about the internet and think about the First Amendment and think about the media, but it turns out that we also care a whole lot about how the real estate in the country is handled. And it turns out we've got an amazing amount of real estate in the country. And the Department of Interior handles not just the land, but the people who interact with the land, and manages a complicated set of topics. So Carlos, I imagine you could tell us a little bit about how you got to Interior and how Interior is actually impacting all of us in ways that we might not even be realizing just because the internet is so present.
Sure. So unlike I think some folks on the panel, I didn't know when I was either in law school or leaving law school that I wanted to work in government. I somehow decided that I wanted to be in D.C. instead of moving back home to California. I think in part because I thought, well, there's interesting things that lawyers do in D.C., and maybe one day I'll want to do one of those things. But I had no idea what that meant. So I worked for a firm, and then I went back to Philly to clerk for a year, and then I moved back to D.C. to work at another firm, and then I had an interesting situation where I went out to our Los Angeles office and helped, served as, I was like a secondment there and helped to bring on some new lawyers, and had a great experience out there working with a really small group of white-collar folks. And then when I moved back to D.C. to the main headquarter office that was, 200-plus lawyers, realized that this was not for me anymore, and I needed to figure out what was next. And so I looked far and wide and talked to hundreds of people probably in DC, hundreds of lawyers in the area, try to get a sense of what they did and what they enjoyed about what they did. And I kept coming back to my friends who worked on Capitol Hill having sort of the neatest experiences, and the things that they were talking about that they did on a day-to-day basis seemed to be the most exciting to me at the time. And so I took a ridiculous six-figure pay cut and a relatively junior job working for a member from California, and got a great experience learning a whole lot just about how Capitol Hill operates, and working on a number of different legislative issues in front of the House Judiciary Committee, and then started thinking about what I wanted to do and maybe how I could bridge my legal experience working in private practice and clerking for a federal judge and the things that I was learning about policy and the legislative process working for in a personal office, and ended up moving to the House Oversight Committee, which was kind of a great marriage of those two things, doing investigations. It was really political. It was really strategic. It was, a lot of big picture thinking and, really playing the chess game that is politics in D.C. And that was a blast and a lot of fun. And, after I was there for a couple years, I started thinking about, well, what's next? And maybe that's my own affliction, or it's a function of political jobs, as the 2-year itch kind of hits. And I was approached about a job at the Department of the Interior, which was completely different than anything that I'd worked on while I was on the Hill. On the Hill, I worked on judiciary issues and I worked on national security issues. And the administration called and said, "Hey, would you be willing to do oversight work at Interior?" And at first I was like, "No, that's not me. And eventually I kind of came around to, well, this is a good next step, and you never know when you're going to have the opportunity to work in the administration. You never know when it's going to be the right administration for you, and maybe it's a good time to get that opportunity in to check that box while all the opportunity's there." So I ended up accepting the job at Interior, and as Scott was saying, there's a ton of interesting issues at the Department of Interior. And one of the things I love about oversight is I get to sort of dabble in all of them. You sort of jump into an issue, you learn a whole lot about it in like this amount of time because that's all you have, and then you figure out what your strategy is and how to move forward. And Interior has everything from the Bureau of Land Management, which has been in the news recently, some land issues out in Nevada you might have heard about. We do all the offshore oil and gas regulations. A lot of mining issues come through the Department of the Interior. Certainly, as the Bureau of Indian Affairs is part of the Department of the Interior, we do a lot of Native issues. And then, we have the National Park Service, which is a lot of fun and a great organization to work with, although they still get picked on quite a bit by Congress too. So that's a little bit of how I got to where I am.
Let's come back down the row and let's start with Carlos. What do you think of as from your perspective? You've seen a lot of different. Each of you have seen a lot of different parts of government. What do you think are the best features of working in the government for you?
So I think for me, and I think this reflects some of the other comments that were made, it's the ability to bridge the legal education and experiences that I've had with these really interesting policy questions. And, again, the I think the thing that's fun about being in DC, the political realm as well. And from where I sit, I get to dabble in each of those things and actually sort of bring them all together in, the way that we, respond to congressional investigative requests, say, has a lot to do with, where we're going on, big policy issues, not just at the Department of the Interior, but across the administration. And so those are the types of things that I get to think about and work on a day-to-day basis. And even if I were in a private practice, I don't think I'd really get to do that. Certainly not, given the public policy aspects of the job.
And for you, Johanna, is it what Aaron Sorkin tells us? Is it what the media tells us? What is that? The juice? Is that the goodness?
Yeah, it's good to be the decider, I think. One thing I really have valued is being able to help influence decisions that have, real impact. And that will sometimes raise inquiries from Congress or get written up in the news. Or one thing the FCC gives us every day or they submit is to all of the staff is articles about, people talking about the FCC. And so it's fun to read articles where people are saying, like, this is what the FCC should do with, like, Comcast Time Warner. This is why the FCC shouldn't approve this deal. And you're like, oh, I actually know the people they're talking. You know what I mean? You're reading it because you're interested, but you're also like, I'm even though I'm not on that deal per se, but, I know the people who are on that deal, and I know the matters that they're thinking about. And, you're in the agency, and the people who are working on these matters, or sometimes they're the matters you're working on, and you have to make the decision and justify it. So, like, one of the matters that I'm working on is trying to get rid of a rule that's become a loophole. And, I had to write a section on, like, why the FCC had the authority to do it. And it's probably something that's going to be, the broadcasters are going to sue us on. So it's cool to think about, like, the section I'm writing, which certainly will be has been edited and will continue to be edited. But, I'm writing why we have authority to make this decision. And that's just not something you get to do in private practice. You can, you try to influence the decision makers, but, to actually help write something and say, this is why we have the authority, this is why we're doing what we're doing, and, and then know that a few years down the line, some court is going to agree with you or not. It's been really fun.
And I'm curious, both Heath and Laura, if you don't mind, just because we've heard a lot of positives, if you want to throw in what you think of as the negatives, which is to say, other than the pay cut, which we'll get to in a moment, if you want to throw in what you think are the things that kept you up at night the most while you were in various roles in government, or should have kept others up at night. Whichever way you want to go. Let's start with
maybe as a transitional matter, then I'll start with something that's both perhaps a positive and a negative. Sure. And that's, I think, that if you're particularly, really at any stage in your career, but particularly those that are thinking about moving from, a law firm to the government, your first sort of government job, increased responsibility. And the reason, in many ways, there's a couple reasons for the increased responsibility. One is that the government agency itself has an awesome amount of power in many cases and authority to make change, to promulgate regulations, to enforce regulations. And so by virtue of that, you're going to have probably a lot more authority. But the other thing is that there's far fewer resources. That when you're an attorney in the government, particularly at a certain age, do you have a secretary? Confidential assistant, a host of paralegals, and everything to beckon to your call? Probably not. That's a major difference. You've got so many responsibilities, so little time, and often so few resources.
Yeah, and just to kind of go off that, I think also because you have a lot of responsibility, often, at least at state, kind of your issues are your issues. So there aren't necessarily other people that are handling those matters, which can be awesome and can also be terrifying. Particularly when, like me, you kind of came in, and I came in really new to my job. I really didn't know that much about the issues that I was going to be working on. And I was placed there, and all of a sudden, just based on kind of my title, or at least what my portfolio was, I was kind of supposed to be the expert on those issues. So that meant a lot of reading and a lot of reading of treatises and things like that at night to really kind of steep myself in what I was supposed to be doing. But I think that is somewhat of a constant refrain, at least at the State Department, I'm guessing in other agencies, because I don't know, it seems to me in the government there seems to be more of an emphasis on like general lawyers as opposed to like a really, really small specialization. So I think at a law firm, if you were to go along and continue to rise, your practice would kind of continue to get skinnier and skinnier because you would have one issue that you're the expert on, and that's why people are hiring you. The State Department, at least, is really interested in having kind of smart generalist lawyers that they can throw into different situations at different times. My job in particular, you rotate in and out of offices every 2 to 3 or 4 years, so you're basically in an entirely new job every 3 years or so. Which was really attractive for me coming in, but again has this downside of, you know, you're kind of starting from scratch every few years of learning a new practice area, you know, learning new law, which can be a little bit tiring.
The former law professor in me can't resist pulling a nugget out of goodness and free advice for those of you who are looking for jobs out of this last round of conversations. How did you put it, Heath? How many of you have really amazing unlimited staff? Okay, I'm very grateful. I'm a commissioner. I've got a confidential assistant. I have 3 counsels. They have each between 15 and 25 years of experience. 2 are lawyers, 1's an economist. Anywhere I go in the building, everybody knows exactly who I am. It's really not hard for me to get help. But what's the good news in that for anyone looking for a job? If you go to every major law firm, if you go to every department, the secretary, the undersecretary, the head of the practice group, she's probably getting plenty of people. Probably everyone in the building knows who she is. Probably every junior lawyer in the building wants to do her work. Probably she's going to bed at night, every night, highly confident that the next morning, if she expects work to be on her desk, done, blue booked, it's done and blue booked. The opportunity there is most of the people below her, okay, so most of the junior partners in the law firm, most of the deputy assistant undersecretaries in the department of X, Y, and Z, most of the non-commissioners at the various commissions. If you look around Washington, there are probably tons of those lawyers. And every one of them is pulling their hair out every night, pretty confident that when they come to work the next morning, they'll be doing their work. And they would probably love more than anything else to have somebody there to help them get their job done a little bit easier. So if you are looking for a job, whether it's in a law firm or in a government agency, and you target the recruiting coordinator, or if you target the secretary or the commissioner or the senior partner, those are probably formally appropriate things to do and socially congenial things to do, but as a mechanism, almost assuredly not terribly effective in targeting the very people who are screaming to have your help every day. So in addition to formally doing what's formally appropriate, you might try to find your way to interact with the junior partners, the deputy assistant undersecretaries, the second in commands in particular divisions, third in commands, because you might find that those people, and you could run into them all over Washington, and by the way, all over Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, and many of the other major cities, at various bar events, at various alumni events, you can run into those people, and you, in your brief interactions with them, can convince them that you're the kind of lawyer who wants to be there to solve their problems, and they're going to want to hire you more than they want to breathe their next breath of oxygen, because you're going to save their life. You're going to allow them to go home and see their children one night when they otherwise wouldn't. You're going to allow them to have confidence that the work they're doing for the public is getting done right and that someone's supporting them and checking them. This is, on the one hand, a bad news story about how hard it can be in government if you're not in one of those senior positions, but it's a great news story if you're looking for jobs in government or anywhere else, because those are the people who are hiring. Those are the people who are screaming to hire in government and out of government. Those are the people to target. So maybe as a follow-up question, let me ask, how did you get your government jobs? Did you want them? Did you ask for them? Who did you talk to about them? Did you apply over the transom, so to speak? Did you use your networks? Was it a clerkship co-clerk? Was it a college roommate? Was it a political party campaign coworker? What really do you think is the mechanism that got you in the door? And instead of going just back up and down the line, let's open it up. Who would like to offer up an interesting story?
I don't know, 3 people just looked at me, so.
We'll start on this side. And we'll
I'm
move
happy
up.
to start. So, I would say that's, a really good point. And, going back to what I was saying earlier about sort of networking and, starting the process that I started when I was looking by talking to people who were doing things that I might be interested in doing, that process sort of evolved over time as my focus became clear on what I wanted to do next. And as I realized I wanted to get on the Hill, I started going back to some of those people and saying, I really think this is what I'd like to do next. So if you hear anything, on the Hill that would be a good fit for me, let me know. And hey, if you know anyone else who might know about jobs on the Hill, do you mind introducing me to them? And sort of going through that iterative process in a very methodical way and thinking about.
I'm curious, how many did you say no to?
How many
serious, credible opportunities did you say no to?
Probably a handful.
And why? Like what? I mean, in other words, I'm not asking you to talk trash. I'm asking you to say what should an applicant, what should a socially constructive, what should a good government servant do when she's thinking about becoming a government servant? When should she serve, and when should she say, no, that's actually not a good thing?
So, I think the types of opportunities that came my way that I said no to were, frankly, career lawyer jobs at agencies that did not resemble the issues that I was most interested in, right? Where I would not be working on those key issues that really drove me, because what I was looking for when I moved from private sector to government was something that would make me excited to go to work every day in a way that, although there were aspects of my job at the firm that I enjoyed, I was looking for a different kind of motivation. And so I wanted to, it was those jobs that weren't going to give me that motivation, although it would probably have paid a lot more, for example, that I ended up turning down. And so, I think the last thing I'll say on this is just that as though I've progressed through my career, that process has changed where, now, in my last jobs and now as I think about what I want to do next, I'm now part of a relatively small group of people, political types who, in my party, who do the type of work that I do, and I know them and they know me, and we sort of have a good understanding of each other and our strengths and weaknesses and who might be a good fit for the next job that comes around.
Any different takes on that from any of the other panelists?
Well, not a different take, but I would just agree with what Carlos said, is the power of networking. So the FCC, at the time I applied, had their own jobs website. Now the jobs are through USA Jobs. So I was surfing, or I would always go to the FCC jobs board to see what jobs were available. But at the same time, I also told everyone I knew that I wanted to work at the FCC. And I knew I wanted to do media work at the FCC, just based on, at Arnold and Porter, I did a lot of wireless work as well as media work. And I also knew that if I had gone to the wireless bureau, especially the areas I was most interested in, like competition, I would have been conflicted out of all the matters because of AT&T's deals that were going on. So I started just telling everyone I knew. I was like, I'm looking for a job at the FCC. And then I had friends who were at the FCC, you know, in kind of senior positions who, you know, would email me when there were openings or, you know, say, like, please apply to this. And then I would go to because the communications, like, lawyers have their own bar association, I would go to FCBA events. And I met people through my law firm and then through my own attendance who worked at the FCC or knew people that worked at the FCC. So for 1 month in like July of 2010, I was at the FCC every week, it seemed like, either doing an informational interview or interviewing. So I would just stress the importance of, you know, applying for the jobs online. I mean, because that's how you formally apply, but also networking because, you know, I mean, when I was applying in 2010, the government had been on a hiring freeze for a while. So when it opened up, you know, you had hundreds of people applying for these same jobs. And so, you know, the most important thing is to get someone to look at your resume to get the interview. And so having kind of done networking, it was easier for people to call down or, you know, say a good word for me. And, you know, so people knew to look out for my resume. And the job I currently have, I actually didn't get initially. So I applied in March and like had the interview in July and then like didn't get it. But then the job reappeared in November on like the FCC jobs website, and everyone who I knew who had worked in government before said, oh, you should just apply again because the reason you probably didn't get the job initially was more of a funding issue than a you issue. And so I applied again, and then I got a phone call in January from the division, and they were like, we're so glad you applied again. We really liked you. We really don't want to interview anyone else or the other hundreds of people, so just send us your references, and while we can't say the job is yours, it's, you know, it's yours. So I just stress that you not only want to apply, but really kind of find people who know, you know, just start telling your network that where you want to go and what you're interested in doing, and see who they know, and then attend kind of bar association events or, you know, Penn law events, you know, whatever, because you never know who knows someone else. Look on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, I'd say very few people are hired as a new resume, right? I think even in government, you'd think, well, the government, it's objective and it's, you know, it's all process oriented. But as I think what you're finding out is that even in a federal buttoned up agency, you know, it's still who you know. I mean, people, and it's true, and certainly true in law firms and laterals, but even in the highest levels of government, particularly in the highest levels of government, they come up with a position, but they have a person in mind, and they say, all right, well, it's going to be one of these few people. And I have found that in many ways, at least 2 or 3 of the jobs I had, the person who had the job who was leaving, you know, said, well, here are some people you should think about. So, and, you know, apart from sort of commissioner gave you a list of a bunch of people, but also the people that you should be thinking about networking with and also trying to demonstrate that you're a good person and would do a great job are the people that currently have these positions. Because certainly in the more political branches, there's a lot more movement. And so oftentimes, you know, positions will come up and they'll say, well, look, if you're going to move on to the Department of the Interior, you have to help me find a replacement. And then at this point, you know, you can name a few people.
I'm curious, Laura, whether you either want to add directly to this conversation or maybe take us in a slightly different direction as you wish. But one thought would be, how did you pick the United States government? There are obviously lots of international governmental bodies that do the things that your organization does, as well as even non-international bodies, but governmental bodies in other governments. How did you pick the State Department of all the places to do the mix of diplomacy and finance?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit, a lot of the issues may be similar kind of across either working for other governments or working at different kind of nonprofits or UN bodies. But your position is actually quite unique, being kind of at the US government, because you're really kind of getting to do the policy formation, not just kind of advising people on what that should be. In particular, also right now, I represent the US in kind of international tribunals or arbitrations and whatnot, and that's somewhat of a unique position to be in, to represent the U.S. in that way, kind of on that international scale. And there are a lot of tribunals and things that the U.S. may be a party to with other individual governments, so it's really like just the U.S. litigating against another government that I was interested in doing. So, and I think also the Office of the Legal Advisor in particular is a very unique office. Many other governments actually outsource their government's international law work to a law firm. So, you know, a lot of law firms represent, you know, sovereign governments, but the U.S. basically does it in-house. And so you're kind of an international law firm, but, you know, within the Department of State. And there's something really attractive about that. And then just about the ability to kind of move through and work on so many different issues kind of within that mini law firm was really attractive to me.
The only thing I'll just add, if I may, is that, and I recognize these views, we all are offering our own views. And certainly mine, given what I've just heard, may be rather esoteric from the rest of the panel. But I did not apply for the job that I currently have. People called me and asked me whether I wanted to do it. People who I didn't know. You know, I previously was asked by a different president of a different party to take another presidential appointment Senate confirmation position, and said no to that one. And you know, that one neither had to do with the particular party of the president or the particular party in power. So for me, at least, I just have to offer up an alternative stream, which is the government is an extremely powerful thing, and if you imagine being on an airplane today and you toss a tennis ball up and down, you'll have a pretty good sense of the forces acting on that tennis ball in a gee whiz kind of human kind of way that will resemble tossing a tennis ball up and down sitting here on the ground. But you're actually moving at 500 and some odd miles an hour in a direction perpendicular to the direction you're tossing the ball up and down. There are ginormous forces at play while you're on that airplane moving, and yet the ball looks like it's being tossed up and down, just like when you're on the ground. The government is one of those big focal points for very, very big forces, and very, very big things can happen as a result of that. If you're on that airplane and you just step outside, you could easily imagine falling, but that turns out probably not to be the most dangerous thing at that moment. You'll freeze instantly if you go outside of most commercial airplanes at altitude, and you'll suffocate. And one of those two will kill you before the deceleration trauma of hitting the ground. Those are the big, and by the way, the wind hitting you in the face without protective gear. Just ask people who jump out of airplanes. So I would just encourage you all also to keep in mind that it's okay to say no to a government job for non-utilitarian reasons related to the short trajectory of your career. It's okay to say no because you don't see how you can help the public. It's okay to say no even when the power is so present, and even when people will tell you, as they did tell me, do you understand you'll have a chit in the game? You'll be Your Honor. Getting a presidential nominated Senate confirmation position gets you that. You'll be easy to be nominated for something else. There's the bank shot. Take this job and it sets you up well for the next one. And I would just hope that you would all consider not taking that job, that it's okay to say no to that job. Unless you think you can help the public, it's actually probably best to say no and do something else helpful. So I know that that's counterintuitive. I know that I don't mean to throw a damper on these things, but I had a wonderful time doing a whole lot of other things. I never planned my career, and I will just tell you, none of my mentors, neither of my parents, who both happen to be Penn alum as well, although not of the law school, no one in my family was a lawyer, but none, my judge, my parents, most of the bosses I've had in my career who I thought were amazing people, none of the men and women who I've looked up to actually planned any of their careers, and I never planned mine, and I had no idea how I got where I am going forward. Looking backwards, understand how I got where I am, and I think it makes sense, and I hope I'm adding value, but I didn't plan it, and I certainly avoided bank shots, not because I thought they were risky to me, quite the opposite. They were probably quite helpful to me, but because I thought they were risky for what they could do generally. And so I just offer that as another way of thinking, but sorry.
Yeah, no, I think just to add to that, I think it was Dwight D. Eisenhower that said that plans are useless, but planning is invaluable. I think all of us have had a bit of serendipity, a bit of luck. Things just sort of happen and you go with it. But I think you also kind of need to be ready and be thinking about, well, if it does happen, if I am presented with an opportunity, what am I interested in? What do I think I can do good at? Where do I think I can make a difference? So you can't plan every step, but I think if you get an idea of where you'd like to put your talents and start meeting some people, then things will happen, that they will. And then the other thing I think that struck me about one of your earlier comments was the title of this is Government and Public Policy, a career in government and public policy, and there's a lot of ways you can shape public policy outside the government. Think tanks, right? You were at the Hoover Institution, or still are, the Carnegie Institution where we are now. I mean, there are a lot of other opportunities out there where people are doing tremendous amount of work for good, influencing the law, tackling really interesting legal issues that in some cases the governments themselves can't tackle for various reasons. So I would also put that out there as a potential avenue as well that you might not be thinking of offhand.
And I just want to stress again too that just like they've said, that you don't need to take every position, or just because you get it doesn't mean it's the right fit. Because I've been approached about taking other positions at the FCC that are a little more senior, but I just didn't feel like it would be the right move per se. I mean, you just have to balance it out about timing and is it really an area you're interested in, and like where do you see yourself going to, I mean, so you don't have to take everything that comes your way, and so you really should think about what is it you want, what are you interested in, and then and then when you do get approached, is this the right move at this right time, or maybe I should say no to this and keep looking and see what else is out there. So I think it's good to. I mean, sometimes you go for it, but sometimes it's okay. Like they both said, sometimes it's okay to say no too. It's you just really have to evaluate what's best for you at that particular time, and if a move makes sense, and not to take it just because it's the next, it'll take you to another level, but is this are these matters I really want to be working on?
Let's switch gears. Let's talk turkey, so to speak. What are the working for the government means a big salary difference from working in a private practice law firm. Getting any job, it means you have to go through the just unfortunately clumsy process of applying for a job. And right, you all know what that is, right? That means you have to prepare a resume, you have to list references, you have to go to interviews, and that means not go to the job you're already in. You have to let the people who are going to field those reference calls know that they're going to get a call, so they don't say who, what. and at the same time not tell the team you're currently on, good luck with that, because I'm going to another team. How did you juggle any of those logistical problems? Laura, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I knew kind of for a while that I would be thinking about going into public service after being at the firm. And so in particular, I was pretty close, in particular with one partner I had worked with as well as some senior associates, and I never really made it like a huge mystery that that's where I might be going, and that wasn't a problem at all. And in fact, the partner that I was working for had been at the SEC for over 10 years. I mean, he had come in and out of government, and it was quite common in the firm to come in and out of government. And so that took away a little bit of the kind of, scared nature of it. That's not to say that I went around telling everybody at the firm that I was, looking to leave. But fortunately, when I needed to put him on a reference list and I went to him and said, I'm thinking about applying for this job I'm really interested in, I want to put you on the reference list. He, of course, said, no problem. And when they called him to ask for a reference, they actually asked him, do you think this is a position that she would take? Do you think that this is kind of where she sees like the trajectory of her career going? Do you have any ideas about that? And I mean, we had a lot of conversations about it, so he was, pretty confidently able to answer that, this was certainly something that he could see me doing, that I had talked about working in public service. And so that was really helpful in a way that I had been open about it. That doesn't necessarily answer all of the kind of day-to-day logistical questions that I was kind of needlessly paranoid about, I think. But at least overall, I think, too, I always had in the back of my mind that this happens all of the time. Particularly at the law firm that I was at, but I would say probably for almost every law firm in DC. People are going into government all the time. Generally, the firms are really happy to see their associates go into government. Of course, there are going to be different situations and circumstances, but that was my experience, that people were really happy when I told them where I was going and what I was doing. And so it wasn't kind of as scary as I had thought it might be.
Other
Yeah, so maybe I'll give both views, because I was an associate who left the government. Now I'm a partner and I got associates leaving to the government. I think it depends on your situation. I think for the most part, in Washington in particular, people understand that government service is a part of a lawyer's career, maybe a permanent switch to public service, or maybe spending a few years investing in oneself. So if you go back out to private practice, you can perform your skill set with even greater skill. But I think, if you're at a law firm now or you're at a private, industry group, I think you got to think about, how long have I been there? Have I earned my stripes? And are people expecting me to sort of go to the next stage, whatever that is, either internally or externally? If you're there for 6 months and you then say, well, I want to leave and go to the government, that's probably not going to go over well. If you've been there, 2 to 3 years, and, then I think it probably makes sense. The conversation will come up probably somewhat naturally. But I think, again, it's based on your situation. One thing I would caution, though, is maybe wait till you start to get some bites from government agencies that are interested, and then at that point, maybe make the approach. Because what you don't want is a situation where, for whatever reason, let's say the law firm is experiencing some kind of downturn. As many of you may have found over the last 5 years or so, you give the signal, hey, I want to get out of here and go to the government. If you do it too early and you don't necessarily have some things lined up, then your current job may be at jeopardy. So just gauge. I think it's a situational matter.
Other perspectives, either?
As far as going, leaving work to go interview and things along those lines, I mean, fortunately at AMP, while partners, I mean, you have your BlackBerry so they can reach you, but I mean, I told my assistant what was going on at some point, and so she was able to kind of if there was an emergency, she, could handle it. But I mean, people leave the offices all the time. So no one's necessarily like checking for you every hour of the day per se, unless you're, in the middle of something. So that's probably not the best time to interview anyway. But generally speaking, I don't think like going to interview or, not being in the office at certain times, raised any questions. And I was really fortunate that I did talk to a couple partners in my group who I didn't directly work for to kind of get their advice especially when I was balancing like different job opportunities. And then I had a senior associate in my group who actually served as my reference when they wanted to talk to someone at the firm. So I think it's really great to have people who you trust, and then you have to decide who those people are at the firm who can kind of counsel you. And kind of like Laura said, Heath, my firm was, once I told them I was leaving, they were all very supportive, sad, which I guess is a good thing. And they all said, look, this puts you in a better position, for your future career development. Because as they both said, especially in DC, and especially being a regulatory practice, it's really expected that you go work for the regulatory body or some government agency at some point. So I think, typically it's not a shock when it happens. It's just a timing thing. And you just want to make sure that, your firm isn't in the middle of something, or, you're working on something where you're the only person. So if you do get a job, you kind of leave them shorthanded.
And I would just say, maybe a slightly different perspective on this, in that my most recent career moves have been not from a law firm to the public sector, but within the public sector. And I think as Heath was saying, it's very dependent on your situation, circumstances, and context about sort of what's the appropriate time to start thinking about moving where you're not going to burn bridges. How to approach the people you work with, what kind of relationship you have with them. Obviously, it's going to depend on that, and how you think about your career and use those people as mentors as opposed to other people who may be in your network or you've worked in the past. There's a funny thing, of course, that happens when you leave a job. Sometimes those old bosses become much easier to have frank conversations with than when they're your current boss. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, because you don't want to lose those people as allies in your career, and oftentimes they're some of your best champions. But I think it is really context specific how you handle that, and you do have to think strategically about is this a good time to leave? Is this the right time to leave? Am I going to be burning bridges? And how do I manage the conversations with my bosses? As I think somebody else said, oftentimes I waited until there were nibbles or sometimes even strong bites before I approached my boss or other people in my work about what was going on.
We want to make sure as well to bring in audience participation and encourage you to ask questions to us as a panel. If there are any at the moment, please signal, and if not, please, we have a couple here. We have a couple of microphones. So we've got, we'll go with whoever distributes the microphone to make the decision who speaks next. So we have first someone in the back.
Hi, I'm going into my third year at Penn, and it sounds like everyone's experience was, the most recent question was discussing kind of the transition from firm work to government or public policy. And I've kind of already made the decision that I want to go directly into government. And I don't know if you maybe could speak to, either anecdotal, experiences with coworkers or your own kind of, experience with making that direct leap.
So I'm curious, several of you worked as law clerks, and that's of course one that is a job in government. It's a term-limited job, usually 1 year, sometimes 2, and sometimes indefinite. But I would imagine the question envisions not the clerkship government job, but rather a topic-specific government job. And one likely to last some number of years. Is that right? Each of you has, each of us has spent a whole lot of time in the private sector, many years. But we all know folks who went straight into the government. It's certainly a path. Are there words of wisdom you could offer for folks who want to go directly into the government? Words of wisdom that any of you might offer about the practical, tactical, short-term things to do or not do, or the slightly longer-term strategic things to keep in mind if going into the government so quickly?
I guess, one thing I would say on that is, that there's a lot of opportunities, I think, to go straight into government coming out of law school that actually are sort of disappear once you're a more senior lawyer. Like I'll just use an example, honors programs at DOJ or frankly many of the other federal agencies. And those are actually great opportunities for, people who know they want to be in government, because that'll really be an opportunity for you to explain that, articulate that, and shine through in the interview process. In our tend to be very sort of merit-based as opposed to, more networking-based, although in a lot of those instances can help if you've done an internship there or something like that. I know a lot of people who do, again, DOJ internships in the summers and then end up going into the honors program. So maybe not specific to you, but just in general, something to keep in mind. I think the last thing I'll say, because I want these guys to get a chance to talk too, is that I think it's great to go straight into government if you know that's what you want to do. And I think a lot of people sometimes do the firm thing because people say, well, it's the best way to get some good experience in under your belt and pay off some bills. But actually a lot of my friends who went straight to government, frankly, make more than I do now, and got a lot of great training right off the bat that is just different than the training that I was exposed to at a law firm.
Other takes from any of the panelists?
Well, are you applying to the DOJ honors program? Is that it? Yeah. So are you interning at the Department of Labor right now? Okay. So smart. Because I would say for the FCC honors program, or any honors program, I think the best way to it's really competitive. And usually the people they choose are people who've interned at the agencies prior, because they've already had a network and they know people who can speak to them. So if you do want to go into government straight away, the best way to do it, and I think really the only way these days to get into government really early on, is through the honors program, and to have the best shot of getting that position, because the numbers, well, they had decreased. Every agency is different, but is to have an internship. But they're a great program, and I know the FCC honors attorneys, meet every month. They get to meet a lot of senior people in the agency. That if you come in later, you necessarily don't have those same opportunities right off the bat, or it might take you a little bit longer, whereas the FCC honors attorneys get to meet senior people right away. So I think it's a great program, and it sounds like you're on the right path.
Other takes, or should we?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think many of the federal agencies that recruit directly out of school have some formal program, and if you're not sort of in that program, you've got your foot in the door at labor, then I think it's a little bit more difficult. The only thing I would add is, if you find yourself wanting a government job, you're coming out of law school, you don't have the connections with, the various departments or agencies, you might consider state government. And a Penn law degree, there's probably not as many people working for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania or state of Maryland or Virginia with a Penn law degree. Great experience in the courtroom or with the agency, and then later on, you can always then apply to go a federal job or just have a great career at the state level.
Yeah, absolutely. We have another question here.
Hi, I'm Tom Holtzman. I was Penn class of '77, and I spent 36 years in the government before retiring in January, and they were very interesting, rewarding years, 10 years at the Labor Department, and then 25, 26 at the Federal Home Loan Bank Board and the FDIC. One thing that hasn't come up in the panel's discussion, except maybe implicitly, that you need to realize if you go into the government is that a lot of it can be very political. And let me give you a couple of examples to understand. When I was at the Labor Department, I worked defending the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and this was in the late 70s. And then the Reagan administration came into power, and they had some really very, very different ideas about positions we should take. And that was, quite frankly, not terribly pleasant. And, we tried to educate some of the regulators, and we succeeded to some extent, but then I moved to a different part of the Labor Department because I couldn't take it. And then at the FDIC in the early part of 2000, I think the theory was that, well, it was Alan Greenspan's theory, which he later admitted was wrong, was that the banking industry could self-regulate because all these bankers would be so concerned about their long-term reputations. And we saw, frankly, all of the same things that we had seen in the S&L crisis come back. And that was, again, it was not a lot of fun to work in an agency which they were attempting to turn into a sleepy agency. Unfortunately, we got new leadership in 2006, and someone who had the foresight to see what was coming. But these are things that you have to deal with in the government. I don't know if any of the panelists have dealt with similar issues, but it's something you need to be aware of. That, you know, you may love what you're doing, and the administration may change, or you may get a new assistant secretary for some other reason who's got totally different ideas about what the agency should be doing.
Well, I would imagine the panelists have comments on that, and I'll just encourage folks, to the extent you would like to share views about them, you know, share them in a way that is, of course, you know, appropriate for the setting. And so in that vein, maybe think of examples, and if you want help, I'm happy to fill in and provide them instead, if you don't want to, so I'm not trying to put any of you on the spot, of so-called tectonic type shifts that are P-political, but small p political. In other words, within the same party, so that this doesn't, because I think we can all imagine it would be hard to be party A in favor of A and then be told by anti-A to not do A. And especially if it's, you know, big P, Democrat, Republican, opposite party. But what about within the same party? What about within the same presidency? You know, if there are more comfortable examples, and again, without putting anyone on the spot. It looks like, Laura, you've got a...
Yeah, I mean, maybe not more comfortable examples, but I mean, my office handles, you know, law of war and Guantanamo and counterterrorism issues. And so that was certainly something that I was thinking about, and going to this job, you know, what might happen. So I talked to a lot of people at the job about how it had changed over past administrations and kind of what the tenor of the job is. I think different offices have a tendency, either kind of within one administration or between administrations, to really turn over. That's not the case for my office. So the Office of the Legal Advisor, most of the office kind of stays through. It's all civil servants, it's lawyers. It would be rare that somebody in my job kind of leaves because of the administration turnover. People feel really independent about the legal advice that they're giving. It's very clear that we're giving advice as lawyers. We don't have, you know, a policy-making role, which is different than I think, you know, maybe some of the other jobs were really there to kind of give legal advice across the board. So that was, and it's something that I continue to think about based on kind of what issues I'm interested in dealing with in the office as a whole, but I have a little bit of a, you know, selection. I can kind of choose what issues at different times, but I have kind of this comfort in the back of my mind that I chose an office in which it's pretty steady through administrations and through time, and that people haven't felt the need to kind of leave based on ideological shifts.
Well, the FCC is an independent agency, but that doesn't mean it's not political. And I would say that most recently, so one of the matters that I'm working on now, the FCC, the chairman left in April of last year, April or May of last year. So we had an acting chairwoman, and she decided that she was really focused on this issue and kind of I drafted this notice of proposed rulemaking, and we got it up to the 8th floor, which is where that's where the chairman and the commissioner sit, and everything at the FCC has to get voted out, and it needs to be a majority of the commission, the majority of the commission has to vote on something. So she wanted this. So once the chairman left and the acting chairwoman got in power, she, had the decision to kind of close this loophole, and kind of got a lot of the broadcasters, caught them off guard, and we drafted up this notice, and then for it to get voted out, it was interesting to see how politics came into play and what sentences got deleted and what, things had to get rewritten just, to get the votes it needed. And then the new chairman came into power in November. And so the question was, okay, well, we put out this notice, but is he going to, make sure that the order comes out in a relatively speedy amount of time, or is he kind of going to sit on it? And so I think, even though it's the these are all Democrats who are empowered, what their priorities are can shift, or the priorities can shift between who's in power and, what comes out of the agency quickly and what doesn't. And luckily the chairman's on board with, what we are doing. But as this order gets moved up, it'll be interesting to see, because it's somewhat political, and, what offices, how the different commissioners want things to be said and what they negotiate on, and then when we put in the edits. So as far as like drafting it and, moving it up, writing something, it's not so political, but when it has to get voted out, that's when, the politics come into play, and like the powers that be get to decide what language, is said.
I'll just follow up on Laura's comment about just to remind you, there are a number of parts of the government that seem to be political but are really quite independent. And there are a number of parts of the government that are labeled as independent and are far less independent than they may seem. So just to give a straightforward example that is entirely parochial, my commission, the International Trade Commission, is almost unique. Unique is a funny word, not really one subject to degree, but we can debate the linguistics of that later. The Federal Election Commission happens to be modeled on the ITC, but it operates differently. Other than the ITC and the Federal Election Commission, most of the other alphabet soup of so-called independent commissions operate in a way that, as Johanna pointed out, are actually party non-independent. Put differently, they are 5-member commissions, which means there is a majority of the party in power. The chair usually can sit for the term of the president and can be removed by the president. Whereas at the ITC, it's 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and the chair is required by statute to switch person and party every 2 years. And those differences turn out to radically change the commission. So, for example, at the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, the Federal Communications Commission, the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, most of the alphabet soup of independent commissions, basically the staff work for the chair who works for the president. And at our commission, basically every staff member in the building can predict accurately that they will work for most of the 6 commissioners as chair during the 9 years of each commissioner's term, because the chair will switch every 2 years. And in fact, our statute cripples the chair so that the chair can in fact be overruled by a majority of the commissioners. And so in fact, we rarely split along party lines. And there really, if you're an academic and you model the game theory of this, I used to be an academic, I love those things, there really are 2 equilibria, heaven and hell, right? And the hell equilibria is nobody gets along ever, and the heaven equilibria is that sucks, and it's not fun, so like let's not choose that. And we haven't, and my colleagues and I get along very, very well. The commission is famously independent and famously stable. There are downsides, by the way, that come from being independent. our budget is much smaller than the other budgets of the other more political agencies because, you know, the way politics work, that's juice. But there are plenty of parts of the government where there's actually plenty of room for nonpartisan, independent-oriented work, even if you're a proud member of one party or the other. And certainly even if you're not a proud member of one party or the other. So you shouldn't think of government as only about politics, but it is a great question. Capital P politics comes in a lot, and even within a party, any group suffers collective action issues, and small p politics are part of any group. Let's take another question. We have one right here in the middle.
Hi, I'm Suyash Paliwal. I'm a fourth-year associate at a firm, and I think there are probably a lot of people at firms here who are interested in government, but my question is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of leaving the private practice at different times, different levels of experience, and what is the right time to go? What are pros and cons of each different time?
Would anyone like to field that in particular? Please.
Sure, I'm happy to address it. Well, okay, so I think what you have to think about, number one, is do you want a permanent career in the government, or do you want to go into the government to get a skill set that you can then return to your firm or another firm? So that's the first question. And the answer to that, so depending on which path you choose to take, I think it would be different. I think it probably makes sense to stay a few years at a firm, 2 to 4 years, let's say, at the first level, before going into the government. I think the private firm experience is good. It's great for your resume. And then I think it does give you a skill set that's helpful. Beyond that, I think you can go in whenever you're ready, so to speak. Whenever you're ready to make the financial commitment and the lifestyle change, I think it's fine. I don't think it's ever too early or too late. Maybe too late would be 25 years or something, but it's never really too late to go in. It's just that the set of jobs that are available to you or the types of things that you'd be doing may be different. If you're thinking of going to the government and then coming back to a firm, that actually requires a little bit more thinking, because you don't want to come into the firm too senior. So you probably, if you go out as a fourth year, then you probably want to think about coming back as a seventh year or so you have another 3 years to go back to the firm to be counsel or partner, if you think. So it's coming back to the firm where I think you have to be more interested in the timing. That's at least my perspective.
Yeah, I would say too, it really just depends on what jobs you're kind of interested in government. So I spend a lot of time looking at different job descriptions and to see, like, even generally what they post, kind of how long people are in those jobs. Because, I mean, you know, honestly, I didn't really want to go to a job where I was going to be there with like everybody just leaving law school. But then I also wanted to be able to get the job. So, you know, it kind of was a little bit of a balance of, and a lot of the jobs I was looking at were more kind of, so this job clearly, and kind of trial attorney jobs at DOJ and that kind of level of job. And that was around the kind of 2 to 4 years experience. And so I wanted to kind of stay within those windows because those were the jobs that I actually wanted to go do. And I didn't want to kind of go too early or then super late on some of those jobs because you can kind of get overqualified if that's really, you know, you want to be that trial attorney. But that could be hard if you stayed 8 or 9 years because, you know what I mean, it's just a different level of, you're at a different level at that point.
Let's take another question from the audience.
My name is Edith Michelle. I'm probably the only non-attorney here. I am a graduate of Penn, 1983. And I'd like to talk about some intergenerational issues. I am in local government right now, and I'm thinking about the fact that I have to work a lot longer. And so I would like to bridge my next move into federal government. And I'm concerned about a couple of issues, how to do that, because young interns are the ones that are more attractive in the workforce. And as an older person with experience in another level of government, how do I bridge that experience and leverage it in a way that makes it more successful to get into federal government?
It's an interesting question. I would just start with 2 examples. so I was a lawyer for many years, and then I was a law professor. I taught for many years in schools that had so-called evening programs. I generally found, although I personally was a day student and I enjoyed law school and college during the day, and I thought I was smart and good, I generally have found that I have, as a law professor, preferred, generally speaking, teaching in the evening program precisely because I find that the students are just shockingly well equipped with a diverse set of experiences, insights, and skills, and without some of the emotional angst that a lot of younger people have. So that's just part of life. And so you should recognize that the path of going back to school for anything, whether it's a law degree or anything else, is itself a very exciting path. And I also will just end with the second story, which is my confidential assistant is a woman who's very, very effective in her job at the commission. She had worked previously for one of the former chairs of the commission. She had worked for a couple of big DC law firms, for several big practice groups, and she graduated from college this past summer by going back to school. So, you know, there are many, many successful avenues, but none of that, by the way, should be taken as a suggestion that you actually have to go back to school to make that transition. I could imagine you finding all sorts of productive outcomes whether you go back for something or not. But those are just initial reactions. Does anyone want to add other thoughts to the transition question?
I guess the only other thought I would have is that, to draw a little bit of an analogy to my own experience, when I was transitioning from the private sector to the public sector, I had to think pretty creatively about how to package myself and my skill set for the jobs that I was interviewing for, which I really, frankly, didn't know that much about at the time. I had to get that information from other people who I'd met through my networking who had those jobs and gave me the language to describe my skill set in a way that would be productive in the process, right? And I think that maybe is the type of thing, to think about transitioning from, one type of government to another. It may not be as easy as going from one federal agency to another. Instead, you have to think about what are the skills that I've developed, what do I understand about the way government operates from where I sit here, and how does that translate to what I'd be doing at agency X?
And your experience is a major advantage. I mean, you're saying you're worried, or one of the things is you've got all these sort of young interns coming in and people, but do they have the work experience, the years of knowledge that you've garnered, the leadership? No. So, I mean, I think you're at a major advantage, and I think it's right, as Carlos, you have to think about packaging it in a way that makes sense and shows that you can take all that you've learned at the other job and put it to use for the particular agency that, you're looking at.
So we're going to end now and encourage all of you to hang around and mingle for a little bit. But first, I wanted to thank our panelists and our moderator for so generously sharing all of that wonderful information with us. And we look forward to talking with the rest of you as the evening goes on. So thank you.